research and lab work and stuff, actually figuring out how to turn those mushrooms into meat so we don't need meat anymore. And also is coming here to lead educational sessions and hands-on experiences of what it's like to make a mushroom cultivation project happen. So we'll be growing edible mushrooms here and exploring various uses of mycelium, which is just the most mind-boggling thing on the planet. And I really want to have time for Q&A and stuff because I think Nick is probably one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met on this topic. And I know some of you here might know a little bit about mushrooms too. So if you do, chime in.
All right, may I have your attention, please, everybody? Thank you so much for being here at Sanctorum Ecovillage. I'm very excited to share with you a wealth of knowledge about mushrooms and fungi and mycelium. Additionally, please let me know if I'm too loud or too quiet or talking too fast or too slow. I'm not great at modulating those things, so feel free to just active feedback me into a more preferable rhythm. But with that, we will get started here. So, is the volume good right now? Can everyone hear me? Good? All right. Awesome. So, my talk today is titled A Brief Introduction to Fungal Ecology, as well as a mushroom workshop. So, we're going to kind of have two distinct parts to the workshop today. And I might even get my phone so I can not go over time. But essentially, I'll start by giving kind of a lecture, but also I want folks to ask questions throughout. And then we'll kind of have like a little decompression section, and then we'll go to a hands-on mushroom workshop where everyone will be able to make their own mushroom baby. So I think that'll be a lot of fun, and you guys can bring something home and kind of have it grow with you over time. So that's going to be great. Take a quick peek here. Alrighty. So just to get started, Yasha gave me a great introduction, but I want to sort of do my own introduction because you might be saying, who is this person in front of me? Or how can I presume to tell you about mushrooms and fungi? So I've been working in a lab for a long time, throughout high school, college, and right now I work in the biotech industry. So essentially every day I work in a lab. There's me on the left side. At my last company doing some sterile culture work with like agar plates. I've traveled abroad and kind of looked for fungi and gone to work with indigenous cultures in South America and Mexico. And additionally, I just love fungi. I'm super passionate about mushrooms and fungi, and I think that they're incredible, and I think they have the power to save the world. So I'm really passionate about it, and I hope that you guys will be able to learn at least a few new things through this talk today. So, as far as the structure of the talk, I'm going to have sections with these little kind of like section introduction slides right here. So anytime we're on one of these slides, feel free to pipe up, ask a question. It'll be at the end of each section. I'll start the new one with this slide, so I'll just kind of pause. And if you guys have questions or something doesn't make sense or you just want me to talk more about a given topic, just kind of raise your hand and jump in, and I'll be happy to take those questions as they come. Hopefully you don't have any yet, but first I'll go ahead and address what are fungi. So fungi in nature represent an entire biological kingdom. So equivalent to kingdom plants and kingdom animal, we have kingdom fungi. And fungi are not only mushrooms. So fungi include things like mold, yeast, as well as mycelial fungi. They grow on the ground. Their spores are in the air and in the water. And they fulfill a large number of ecological roles that are all super important. So some of the things that they're important for, they're critical for plant growth. They're critical for soil formation through the breakdown of dead matter. And additionally, a lot of stuff just wouldn't break down without fungi. So woody material, dead trees, logs, sticks, leaves, all of these things are broken down by fungi to be turned into soil for the next generation of plants and animals to use. So as I was saying, mushrooms are just one example of fungi. So on the bottom of the slides here, I have a bunch of photos. So on the picture closest to me, we just have some shiitake mushrooms. Everyone's probably familiar with that. It's super common. We have a lichen in this next photo here. That's an example of a symbiosis between a fungi and a plant or an algae. So lichens have been around for ages and ages, and they were some of the first organisms that were able to transition from aquatic life to terrestrial when the earth was really young. Additionally, we have fungal mycelium that is kind of throughout the soil, and anywhere that you have a healthy plant ecosystem or forest ecosystem, fungi are going to be all over the place, underneath your feet, kind of in and around the plant roots, as well as in that kind of organic matter layer at the top layer of the soil. And then finally on this far left side, on that leaf, we have an example of like a fungal pathogen. So fungi can, they're not only beneficial, but they can also be parasitic. And in this example, it's like a blight on a leaf. And so many things like sudden oak blight, for example, is a fungal pathogen. A rust smut on a corn that you might have for your agricultural crop is also an example of a fungal pathogen. So I think it's really important to understand both the pros and the cons of fungi, or like how are they helping us and how are they hurting us. So to think a little bit about sort of just a little bit more into the biological side, I want to talk about the origins of fungi. So I kind of just have this like basic kind of evolutionary tree right here. So we have kind of like some bacteria, some really basic organisms, and then over time, life split into plants, animals, and fungi. What's crazy about fungi is that they're more similar to animals than plants. And that's crazy to think about because 100 years ago, people thought that mushrooms were a part of trees and that they were the same thing and that they were not distinguishable from one another. But in reality, fungi are, based on the DNA evidence, which we can learn through DNA sequencing, they're closer to they're closer to animals than plants, so they're closer to us than a tree, as far as their DNA makeup and their actual kind of cellular makeup. So just kind of crazy to think about, and we can talk more about this as we go. So to sum up here, fungi are multicellular or eukaryotic organisms, and they have a ton of functions in both a human-mediated as well as a natural environment. So we'll kind of walk through all that as we go here. What roles do fungi play in nature? I've already mentioned a few here, but I'll go through some kind of more detail. So fungi are really everywhere. They live in soil, they're in water, they're in the air, and they even live and thrive inside of other organisms. So they fulfill many roles. They can be mutualists, where they help another organism to survive through a symbiosis where both parties benefit. They can be a parasite, where they're actually parasitizing something else. They're stealing the life and the resources from it, and they're essentially hurting it, period. They can be saprotrophic as well, so that's getting at the sort of organic matter decay. They break down dead matter, they turn it into available nutrients, and they make it available for other life. So these are all critical kind of environmental functions. One great example that I love to talk about and that I've actually studied in depth in university is that they connect the forest to itself. So ectomycorrhizal fungi, kind of a mouthful, but we can just call them EM fungi for now. They link trees to one another. So you might have heard in the news about how trees can talk, about how there are fungal networks in the forest. These are the fungi that allow those networks to happen. So these fungi grow around the plant roots. I just kind of have a tree diagram here, but these fungi are around the plant roots. They penetrate inside of the plant roots, and they connect the trees to one another. So it's through these fungi that trees can communicate. They can send messages, they can send resources, and they can even send warnings too. For example, a plant that's getting attacked by like boring beetles can tell its neighboring tree, hey bud, I don't know if you found out, but I'm getting killed by beetles. You might want to like develop some chemical defenses so that you don't have the same fate. The fungi is what is allowing all that to happen. So they're kind of like this unseen network that's really right beneath the soil, right beneath your feet. You can scoop up the soil and see it, but 90% of people never think about that because it's just not in front of them. And it's also microscopic, so it's kind of hard to see without magnifying it. Additionally, as I was mentioning, they can have some sort of less than desirable functionality. So, like I said, plant pathogens. I have an example here in this top left photo of fungi on corn. So something like 20% of all agricultural crop yield is taken away by fungi. So out of your 10 corn ears that you might have, 2 of them are just gone from the fungal rot, essentially. Additional fungal parasites. So in this top right photo, I have a picture of a chytrid fungi. Chytrid fungi are pretty nasty because they kill amphibians. So frogs, newts, salamanders, all really great animals. They fulfill a unique role in the ecosystem. These fungi live in the water in a spore form. They land on the skin of a frog, for example. They grow hyphae inside of the frog, so you can see the hyphae extending here, almost like roots. And those hyphae will penetrate inside the organism and just eat it from the inside out. So kind of crazy, kind of bonkers. They're actually a really sort of a tricky problem to overcome because amphibians and reptiles are so sensitive to things like rain, moisture, and with climate change, those populations are kind of at higher risk right now. So this is exacerbating a lot of sort of conservation issues. Additionally, molds and toxins. Fungal molds and fungal toxins can be present in food, and oftentimes when you hear like a product recall for anything, cabbage, peanut butter, there can often be a fungi as a part of that that's going to be a contaminant that can be toxic to humans. But at the same time, while they can be so detrimental, they can also be really beneficial. So penicillin, which is a really common antibiotic, is from the Mycelium fungi. So this is kind of discovered in the sort of 1940s, 50s, World War II era. This is just a picture of kind of the structure of what a penicillium fungi looks like. They have these little cells that split off, and it kind of looks like this little hand. But essentially, that's one of the most useful antibiotics that we've had in the last century. And so fungi have the ability both to decimate things, but also to improve our health and our life quality. And then finally, this is just a picture of that ectomycorrhizal, or that EM fungi I was talking about. We have a plant root right here. We have these root tips where it's kind of interfacing with the soil, getting water, getting nutrients, and all this white cobwebby stuff. And in cases, these swollen root tips have fungi inside of them and around them. And that's how plants can actually get mineral nutrients, is through these fungi. So a given tree cannot even get magnesium, it can't get calcium, it can't get these sort of basic soil nutrients without fungi. So it's a part of the reason why they're so critical for nature. So that's kind of talking about nature. I want to answer that same question of what do fungi really do, but in the human environment. So once again, numerous functions, numerous roles that fungi play. They provide food, medicine, and therapeutics through edible mushrooms. Mushrooms are delicious, they're healthy, they have most of the vitamins and minerals that humans need, and they have really low fat and cholesterol, so overall they're just a super healthy nutrition source. As I was talking about earlier, they build our soil in gardens, farms, and lawns. They're a sustainable source of food, so not only are they good for us, but growing mushrooms is good for the environment. Compared to something like intensive animal or even intensive plant agriculture, indoor mushroom and even outdoor mushroom cultivation is scalable. You can do vertical farming, meaning you need a little bit of space to produce a ton of food. And additionally, it's relatively low cost and it's accessible to people who are curious about it. So that's something that we'll cover kind of in the latter portion of this talk through actually getting our hands on this process. But I just want you to keep these ideas in mind as we go, that mushroom production is kind of like, feels kind of crazy, feels kind of out of reach, but in reality, anyone can do it in their backyard, in their basement, in your apartment. So, fungi are super inspiring as well. They're so beautiful. So we have like a Ganoderma fungi on this top right, just kind of looks interesting and cool. It has kind of a lacquer coat appearance to it, so it's often called like a lacquer conch. But these mushrooms are really good for you, and we'll talk more about medicinal fungi. Cordyceps in the top left kind of looks like Cheetos, but it's really good. It can provide a boost of energy, and it's really good for like athletes. It's really good for maintaining stamina and things like that. And then finally, psychoactive mushrooms. Academic studies corroborate this. They provide a deeper connection to nature. They provide therapeutic relief, and they can also elevate your consciousness and your connection to nature when you take it kind of in the right context. So I'll pause for questions here. Anyone have any burning questions right now? Yes.
I'm curious. I might have missed it. The definition of it was like in the list of mutualist, symbiotic, and saprotroph. Saprotroph is my question. What that is?
Yes, for sure. Sorry. So yeah, definitely some sort of specific lingo that I'll get into through the presentation, but that's a great question. So a saprotroph is just talking about something that's decaying dead matter. So it could be a bacteria, it could be a plant, it could even be an animal in some cases, but in this particular case we're talking about a fungi that its main sort of role in the ecosystem and the way that it gets its nutrients is just by eating dead stuff, pretty much, to put it simply. For sure.
So when you talked about the mycelium sharing information between trees, we have the aspen trees, which is known as the third largest single living organism in the world. Is that actually sharing information through their mushroom culture, or is that actually through the root system?
So is that the case where the trees are connected to one another, almost like with rhizomes kind of thing?
Yes.
So in that case, I think the trees might not, aspen specifically, might not need the fungi to mediate communication because they're already connected. So likely they're going to send chemicals through their own roots to the other trees. But those same fungi are probably still present, and they're providing those like mineral nutrients for the trees. So I think they're still part of that system, but they might not just be filling that same communication role that they would, for example, connecting an oak to a pine tree.
So Paul Stamets talks about a mushroom that will save the bees, and I'm wondering, what is that called, and where can everybody get that mushroom so that we can save the bees?
Yeah, 100%. That's awesome. I'm very familiar with Paul Stamets. He's great. I've worked with someone who's very close with him, who's a good friend of mine, and so I've kind of heard a lot of tales, just secondhand, but about Fungi Perfecti, which is Paul's company and the work he's doing. I think it's awesome. So this mushroom is what you're talking about. This is going to be a Ganoderma mushroom. So I'll kind of call out the names of some of these mushrooms, and I'll always say like the genus and species. So in this case, genus is Ganoderma, and species is going to be either like Lingji or lucidum. So Ganoderma lucidum is like the most common reishi mushroom that people talk about, and it's the metabolites and the exudates from this mushroom that Paul Stamets is using for his research on saving bees. So essentially, when this mushroom grows in nature, in the forest, for example, it's growing on a tree, it's relatively humid. This mushroom will exude liquid, and that's called a metabolite because it's part of the metabolism of the organism, but it exudes this liquid, and that liquid is full of kind of beneficial things. So if you drank that liquid, it would probably be good for you. Same thing for bees. Bees in nature will actually find these mushrooms, they'll land on them, and they'll drink that sort of mushroom juice, and that's giving them like sort of an immune boost. And so it's this mushroom that you're referencing, and you can grow this mushroom at home very easily. So we can talk more about that, and I even have a whole slide, or at least half a slide, later on to talk about that. So, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Couple questions. One, I was wondering if you have talked or will talk about the way that mushrooms can actually hack like the neurological decision-making system, or if you want to speak to that at all. Like Dan did in the other retreat, because I was curious about it.
So for insects or for?
I believe it's insects, right?
Yeah, okay, totally. So, so I even have another picture to help answer that. So this Cordyceps that I was talking about right there in the top left, that's going to be Cordyceps either sinensis or militaris, the two most common species of Cordyceps. That is what is often called in sort of pop culture like the zombie ant mushroom or the zombie fungus. And so it's called the zombie fungus because in nature, similar to how I was talking about the chytrids, there's a spore, it lands on something and it grows inside of it. The spores of the Cordyceps will land on an ant, a moth, a butterfly, any insect really. It will land, and then the spore will germinate, and the hyphae once again will grow through the chitin shell of the insect and into his body. Those fungal mycelium will grow into the brain of the insect, and it essentially now has control over the insect. So it can kind of like, you can almost imagine it as if it's pressing different buttons. So it can press different buttons on the ant brain and tell it, oh, go over here, or go to a wet area, or go to a dry area, or just stay still for a while so I can eat you. So it's really incredible, and that ecology is still being researched. It's definitely like kind of a hot topic right now as far as the academic research, but I think it's amazing, and that's the exact same mushroom that we eat for energy. So some people get kind of worried about that, but I personally don't mind it, or I think it's just cool. And I do love taking cordyceps, so I personally fully support taking cordyceps as like a dietary supplement. It's great.
I'm also curious if you'll talk at all about the history of mushrooms and civilization. Is that later?
So I tried to cover a lot, and I'm not going to dive too deep on that, but I can definitely work it in because that is such an important point. I think that as I have this kind of mushroom right here, they're found all over the globe. They're found in Russia, or sorry, I should speak in continents. They're found in North America, South America, Europe, Asia. They're found globally, and they're common. So, these mushrooms have been eaten by humans. There's records of over 10,000 years ago that humans were eating these exact same mushrooms. And so it kind of ties into a common theory that you might have heard. And so that theory, essentially, to condense it really quickly, there's entire books written about this, and you can look deeper into it if you're curious. But that theory is essentially saying that ancestral humans were eating these mushrooms, but only some of the tribes had access, or only some of the tribes had the ecological knowledge to say, oh, this is a good thing to eat. And those tribes essentially had a higher evolutionary fitness because eating mushrooms boosts your visual acuity, it boosts your brain function, it increases neural connectivity. The neurons inside of your brain are getting sort of linked more strongly by eating this mushroom. And so I think that it did play a huge role in evolutionary development of humans, both on the organismal scale, but also in the culture aspect as well. So early religions were likely heavily influenced by this to elevate consciousness and things like that in that sort of context.
And you mentioned once that it was actually intentionally cultivated in ancient Egypt and by civilizations. Was it in the Americas or Mesopotamia?
Yeah, there's many instances, and that was that 10,000 year number that I threw out. So 10,000 years ago, probably even before that, we were harvesting and eating it. But 10,000 years ago, they found evidence of the cultivation in Egypt, as well as Siberia and Russia, and as well as in either North or South America. There's academic articles that I could find and kind of get you the details on that, but yeah, people were cultivating fungus on wheat straw and rye grain in dark rooms, essentially, because that's kind of where fungus, thrives is in like a dark, moist environment. And they were intentionally cultivating fungi to be eaten 10,000 years ago, which is something that, is kind of like a high-level thing to do, is cultivate mushrooms. It's not easy. So, yeah, all super great questions. So we'll keep blazing through, and hopefully I'll, if you guys still have stuff on the top of your head, we can talk more about it, but I think I'll answer a lot of questions kind of as we go here as well. Something you might be asking now is, how do mushrooms grow? We kind of talked about fungi taking many forms, but right now we just want to hone in on the mushroom because it's a very common form of fungi, and it's one of the most readily sort of accessible to us as humans. We eat mushrooms directly, and so in that way it's our kind of direct connection to the fungus. So mushrooms are a part of a larger body that includes hyphae, mycelium, and fruiting bodies, which are also known as mushrooms. So that's just synonymous. The fruiting body is the mushroom, and then this whole hyphal network is in the soil. So I might kind of walk through this diagram. So the mushroom obviously is the fruit body, as I mentioned. It's growing out of the soil, but it's not isolated. It's connected to a much larger network of hyphae that's inside of the soil. So what you can see here is these hyphae. They kind of look like roots. They're just kind of these long, thin things. And to put it into context, this is just a cartoon, obviously. One hyphae is about as thick as like a human hair. So they're extremely fine and delicate, but they're also extremely powerful. They can push through soil, they can search for nutrients, and they can once again transfer the nutrients throughout their entire body like that. So to talk about the life cycle, we start with a spore that is dropped by a mushroom, and it is then dispersed by air, or animals, or water, or it doesn't go anywhere, but it will continue to grow. So once again, this is just a cartoon version, looks like a bean, but a spore is once again a microstructure, really only visible under the scope, but if you have a ton of spores, you can see them as just kind of, it looks like a powder. These spores will germinate in the right conditions. So when it is moist, high humidity, and then the right sort of like, the right environment as well as far as the soil, they're kind of picky about when they want to grow, but then when they do grow, it's really amazing. So I can just show you kind of a macro view. So I have a colonizing jar right here with some elm oyster mushroom, and I don't know if you can see it with the light, but you can see obviously this is just grain, and then you see this white filamentous kind of, it looks kind of powdery here as well, but this is fungal mycelium that I'm cultivating, and this will eventually yield me like edible mushrooms. But just to show you an example, this is a very similar to what you'll see if you go to the forest, turn up some leaves, turn up some logs, you'll see kind of a similar thing to this, and that's going to be that fungal mycelium. So, kind of a unique life cycle. The spores will grow, it will germinate and form a whole hyphal network that once again extends through the soil, and then when it's time to reproduce, it will form a mushroom primordia that just kind of looks like a little nub or a knot of mycelium or hyphae, and then it will finally turn into a full mushroom. And the mushroom's only goal in life is to drop spores. It's a reproductive structure. So when you think about an apple tree, you obviously have the body of the tree. It produces apples. Those apples have seeds. So the apple is the reproductive structure that holds the seeds. Similarly, the mushroom, all it's really there to do is disperse spores to reproduce and to get this organism to grow for the next generation. So despite that, mushrooms are super useful and they have a lot of functions for us as humans, but their ecological role is just kind of like to be there, maybe to be desirable to be eaten by animals, maybe to be colorful to attract like animals to eat them, but otherwise they're just reproducing. And I mentioned this earlier, but historically mushrooms were considered parts of plants and trees because these hyphae are going to be interwoven with the plant roots in the soil. But now that we have like kind of DNA sequencing and sort of next generation biological tools, we know that the DNA of fungi is totally separate from plants. So once again, entire different biological kingdom. So we can also talk a little bit about sort of the anatomy of a mushroom here. So I just kind of have a diagram here to show you different parts of a mushroom. I'll probably come over here. So once again, we have a mushroom here. The base of the mushroom is called the vulva. That's generally where the mushroom is connected to the mycelium in the soil. We have the stalk of the mushroom. That's just the long cylindrical part that holds the cap. We have a ring here, or the annulus is another word for this. When a mushroom first opens, these gills on the underside are covered by mycelium, and then only when it's ready to reproduce will it actually open up. So once it's opening, that ring will kind of break, and then you can see the remnants of it here. So that's just like the remnants of the ring that once covered these gills. Gills are just kind of to guide spores, so they're kind of just little channels that the spores fall between. And it can kind of actually, they shoot the spores, and then it kind of like the wind drives them down through the gills. And then finally, the cap of the mushroom is present, and that's where the gills are kind of underneath. So what's really crazy about mushrooms, though, is there's so many different types. And there's so many forms and colors and shapes, and it's astounding because there's so many, and they're so cool. So gills can either, well, these are kind of, yeah, they can obviously be dense or sparse, but I also wanted to say that gills are not the only way that mushrooms can grow. So right here we have an example of a different type of spore structure, and that's going to be pores. So you essentially see all these tiny holes. Sorry if you're the type of person that is not a fan of this type of image, avert your eyes if so, but these pores fulfill the same role as the gills, and it's just a different way to do it. So each of those pores will kind of shoot the spores out, and then finally there's also this whole other thing, and I believe that's going to be called hymenium or spikes. So the spikes as well, once again, fulfilling the exact same function, dropping spores, but it's an entirely different morphology or appearance that we can study and know. This is a hedgehog mushroom, which is actually a choice edible. It's really tasty. It tastes like walnuts. This is going to be most likely a boletus mushroom. A lot of these types of mushrooms are also edible and delicious, and so a lot of this is to show you what are the types of things to think about if you wanted to go forage wild mushrooms, if you want to go harvest yourself dinner. I'll say it later in the presentation, but I'll also say it now. Never ever in a million years eat a mushroom that you're not 100% certain of the ID. It's really easy to hurt yourself. It's easy to get sick, and it's also easy to kill yourself. People die every year. Tens of people die every year from ingesting poisonous mushrooms. So it's definitely no joke, and I just want to make that abundantly clear so that you don't get the wrong idea. However, having said that, foraging mushrooms is a ton of fun. I highly recommend going with like a mycological society or a friend that you think is kind of well-versed. Because once you learn how to ID common things like hedgehogs are easy, chicken of the woods is easy, oyster mushrooms relatively easy. If you learn these easy IDs and the lookalikes, so the things that you should not eat that can look very similar, it's super easy to get yourself dinner by going to the woods. So it's great. So right now I just want to show a quick little like 2-minute video. And this is just a time lapse. Turn the volume down a little bit here. So this is just a time lapse of fungi. So essentially what we're looking at, these are Amanita Muscaria mushrooms, which are commonly known as sort of like the Mario mushroom. These are actually psychoactive. You can eat them. There's certain ways to prepare them to where you don't get sick. But if you just ate one of these raw, you would get sick for like 8 hours and just like, essentially you'd like throw up like 20 times. But then after you were done throwing up, you would probably have a pretty crazy experience. This is a Cordyceps, and what's happening here, sorry, this is a Caprinus mushroom. I'll just, we'll play it back really fast. This is a Caprinus mushroom. Pay attention to the cap. As it's growing, the cap is literally melting. Do you see this black ink right here? That's called deliquescing of the mushroom, and it is literally just disintegrating into ink. But that ink contains spores, and those spores can once again grow into new mushrooms. This is an earth star mushroom. Its method of spore dispersal is that this little thing, when it gets hit by a raindrop, shoots out a cloud of spores. And that's a way for it to better disperse the spores. Another earth star here. They're really cool. These are super fun to find, because if you squeeze that little spore sac, it will produce a visible cloud of spores. And then finally more Amanita Muscaria. So you can see as it develops from a young mushroom to kind of a mature one, obviously this is sped up, but you can see, you know, we have the ring here splitting, we have the cap extending as it grows, and you can also see some light ridges here. That's an indication that it's likely in the Amanita genus, so different traits to identify different types of fungi. Great videos like this on YouTube, highly recommend. So that was just a quick time lapse to kind of show you in real time what do mushrooms look like. Mushrooms are really ephemeral. When you go hunting for them in the woods, you might not see a mushroom on Saturday, then you go back Sunday morning and there's like an entire field of them. They can essentially pop up overnight, and it has a lot to do with the moisture regime and the humidity present. And we'll talk more about that, I think, on the next slide. Yeah. So in what conditions do mushrooms grow? In both nature and in mushroom farms, mushrooms will only grow under the right conditions. Essentially, they love it really wet. The growth conditions are going to be species and strain specific, meaning that every type of mushroom is different in what they like. Here are just some examples for you to see the difference. So we have a blue oyster on the left and a pink oyster on the right. This is just a picture of a blue oyster mushroom. They're very common. You can get them in grocery stores or from a mushroom farm. So it might want to grow and initiate fruiting at 60 Fahrenheit. It might want to fruit from 60 to 70 Fahrenheit, and you want to hold that humidity around 85% to get good growth. The pink oyster mushroom, on the other hand, because it's a tropical origin species, meaning that it's coming from a tropical place, It likes to colonize at 75 to 90. It'll fruit at 75 to 85 Fahrenheit, but it can go up to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you live in a really humid and hot place like Florida, or if it's the summertime and it's hot in Colorado, this would be a great strain to grow indoors or outdoors, and then once again, high humidity. So different mushrooms primarily have those different temperature ranges, but the humidity range can also be different if you're growing them yourself. Like I was saying, in a forest, you'll find mushrooms after a rain. They'll pop up after that high humidity. Sometimes during the rain, they'll start popping up, and then kind of like day after, a few hours after, you'll start to see like the full flush come up. They'll kind of remain dormant when it's dry. They might not actually be dormant, they're just not visible, right? Because the mycelium, as we mentioned, is still under the soil, and only when it's wet does it actually produce the mushrooms. And finally, growing mushrooms can present a lot of challenges because contaminants also love high humidity. So things like green mold, gray mold, black mold, these things can all grow onto your mushroom cultures, so it's something to look out for if you're trying to grow your own mushrooms. So we'll take a quick little question break again. We're here between sections here, so if anyone has anything they want to learn more about in the meantime.
Like something like Cordyceps, is it better, like how effective is the tincture as opposed to active mushroom, and is it better to like feed it by itself or with other things?
Yeah, that's a super great question. I'm gonna wait to answer it because it's built in.
Okay.
But that is a super great question, and if I don't answer it, remind me to, but I think we'll see it in like the next 2 slides or so.
It's probably pretty similar, but I've heard different things about people eating the mycelium versus the fruiting body.
Got a whole slide on it.
I'm just curious how Cordyceps is grown because nature is like parasitic type thing, but I know that it's also grown too.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'll jump ahead and just kind of ignore the text for now. But we can see the cordyceps in nature right here. So what we're looking at is the carcass of an insect. And you see the orange little Cheeto guys, those are the actual cordyceps mushrooms. So as you're saying, in nature they are parasitic. However, when we grow them indoors, people just grow it on sterile substrate. So they're generally not using insects to grow it. They'll probably harvest it from the wild. So hardcore cordyceps enthusiasts will go to the wild, collect insects that have cordyceps on them, harvest those, isolate the genetics in the lab or in their home lab setup, and then they'll fruit them to actual cordyceps. A very common way to do it is to take a mason jar, so similar to the one I have here, fill it about yay high, just an inch or 2 of substrate, leaving most of it empty, and then the cordyceps will fruit, and obviously you inoculate it, and then they'll fruit into the entire void space. So a lot of people just use mason jars just like this, but with a special nutrient mix. They essentially they're really picky. They're actually some of the hardest mushrooms to grow, as opposed to oysters and other things like that. They're super easy. So they're very finicky, but people have done a lot of research on how's the best way to grow them. All right, so, one more question?
I had a question, but it wasn't necessarily about cordyceps. I worked for the Forest Service a number of years ago, and we worked on a burn area, and it burned the soil so hot that the soil was orange and yellow and white. And so we were working on this burn area for about 6 weeks. So we were in there working for about 3, then we leave, we come back a few days later, and there are morels everywhere. So I'm just curious, like this area, these trees were burnt to nothing. It burnt so hot, so I'm just curious, how on earth do those morels, spores get there, probably wind, obviously, but what did they have besides, that soil had it was like dust. It had no moisture, it was totally done for, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's an awesome question and example. So morels do love to grow in a fire-scorched area, so it's very common, and mushroom hunters will actually target it. So if you're hunting for morels, you might go to an area that burned 1 to 3 to 5 years ago, because that's often a common place to look for morels. And I think what happens is that when a forest fire happens, a lot of nutrients are actually being made available because all those trees are burning and all the plants are burning and turning to ash.
Right.
It's making a lot of nutrients available, and it's also changing the acidity of the soil too. And I think morels, they might already be present in the form of spores, and after that fire comes through, it's actually an activation factor. And those spores that were previously dormant, they realize, oh, I think something changed, and now there's a lot of nitrogen around, or now the soil's really acidic versus basic, or something like that, and it's then a trigger for them to grow.
Yeah, okay.
So
Well,
that's,
there were hundreds of them.
yeah, that's very common, and morels are like some of the most delicious mushrooms that you can eat, so that's a really good example of
It
what
was a
it was doing.
blessing.
Yeah, that's
It
amazing.
fed us for like 2 weeks. We were working and picking and eating, and yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
It grows from one spore. One spore can grow into an entire and it produces it.
Yeah, one spore can grow into an entire hyphal network. I kind of breezed through it just because I'm trying to cover a lot of ground today, but essentially this spore will grow into these, it'll grow into the hyphal net. Each hyphae has a single nucleus in it, so each one of these is a self-contained cell, but they're all connected and they can send resources along the network. Additionally, it'll grow extra nuclei in the mature cell, and then it will transfer them to the younger cells kind of in a serial fashion. And then additionally, just another kind of like crazy fun fact is that one mycelium can contain the nuclei of different types of mushroom. So you can have a morel mycelium that also has an oyster nucleus inside of it, and it can choose when it grows. Oh, I'm growing into a very magnesium-rich soil. Let me grow my oyster genetics over here, and then over here it's like nitrogen limited or something. So let me grow my morel mycelium over here. So it can kind of contain many different genetics inside of itself and self-regulate and sort of use environmental cues to choose how it grows and what it sort of chooses to grow. So yeah, super amazing.
So, I've been reading up on growing mushrooms a little bit because I was interested in growing like food mushrooms on my property. Is it substantially more difficult to grow outdoors as opposed to like in a contained environment? Because I was reading that you had to have like a very sterile space and like controlled conditions for indoor growing.
Yeah, that's a super great question. I think I will talk a little bit about that later, but I will try and give you an answer now as well. So outdoor and indoor growing are both very different as far as, the conditions you need. I think for both types of growing, the common factor is having some kind of sterile space to inoculate. So to grow outdoors, if you have something like colonized mushroom spawn, which I brought a bag of today that looks like this is essentially a bunch of grains that I sterilized, inoculated, and now you can see it's completely white. So the white is the mycelium, which is the living fungi. If you have something like this, and you go outside with some cardboard and some straw, you can get a mushroom bed in no time. And it requires very little technique, it requires very little equipment. You just need some water and a hose to water it, and kind of keep an eye on it sort of thing. But to make this bag is the challenging part. So this bag I inoculated in a biosafety cabinet, which is essentially equivalent to a sterile hood or a sterile airflow. And so you can make one of those at home. It'll cost you on the order of $200 to $500. So it's not super expensive, but it's also not super cheap either. You can also sort of like try and partner with a lab. In some cases, there are shared lab spaces. I know there's one in Oakland. I'm not as familiar with like the Denver, Boulder area. There might be a shared lab you can use. You can also use a Bunsen burner as well. Literally camp stove, light it up, make your bags and jars under that camp stove, and that can be good enough to be sterile. So there's kind of varying levels, and I think I'll talk more about it when we get to the workshop section. But growing outdoor is nice because if it's the right season, you need very little effort and very little maintenance. Whereas indoors, unless you have a very automated set up with like timers and sort of sensors, you need to kind of put a lot of daily maintenance into it. So there's definitely some trade-offs, but I'm a huge proponent of outdoor grows, and I think it's very doable in Colorado. Spring and fall are probably good times to do outdoor grows.
Okay, thank you.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know you want to move on, so
No worries.
Too long. I wanted to ask a question. I know, particular in desert areas, you tend to find a lot more lichen and crypto in these areas, and I'm wondering if there's a type of mushroom that can do good in these really harsh climates to help bring back some of the biodiversity in the areas.
That's a great question. That's getting a little bit outside of what I feel super confident as far as my kind of understanding and answer to you there, but I think that in general, a combination of sort of planting plants and diverting waterways and kind of like growing green areas is a way to do that. So someone who I'm a big fan of is Masanobu Fukuoka, and he's like a Japanese naturalist, and he's kind of pioneered this sort of method called natural farming. And so he's all about letting nature do its thing, and we just kind of want to let nature do its thing and reap the benefits. So he has this entire book called Sowing Seeds in the Desert, where he talks about taking existing plant areas and existing waterways and just planting trees kind of out from it just linearly and just bringing that water into the desert more and more, greenifying more areas. And so I think that using plants and microbes and fungi kind of in concert with one another would be a good way to kind of build resilience and to build larger kind of green spaces in a place like a desert.
Thank you.
That seems to answer my one of the questions, which it was about like how mushroom biology will work here, both in our collaboration at the Ecovillage and for people in this kind of region. And in fact, I actually feel like it's one of the most relevant and fruitful areas to explore in terms of like real local outreach, not just with people like yourselves, but more conservative people in the neighborhood that might benefit from the savings and crop increase and so on. So it sounds like what y'all are talking about right now with figuring out where the land is lower and where there's more water and other trees with mushrooms and bringing water in that way could be one helpful bit of science.
Yeah, totally. I think there's kind of a bunch of ways to kind of attack that problem and a bunch of ways to sort of increase your biodiversity and increase your soil health by using fungi and microbes. And I think there's a bunch of levels, right? So if you're planting your garden bed, because I know you guys have like raised beds and things like that, if you're planting your garden bed with your tomatoes and other sort of edible crops, you can get mycelium just in a bag and just throw it in. And there's Mycorrhizal Applications is one company that sells that kind of stuff. You can also make it yourselves, obviously, once we kind of get you set up to make stuff like this. But there's a lot of ways to get mycelium into your soil by buying supplements or obviously growing it yourself. And then additionally, there's already mycelium present. It might not look like it. Obviously, it's dry. It's mostly prairie around here, right? And we have all these grasses. But those grasses also have fungi in their roots, and those are generally going to be arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which I would abbreviate as AM as opposed to EM, and those fungi are already present in the roots. And so just by letting this ecosystem thrive, and then once again, planting trees and things like that, getting more plants, getting more water, getting more microbes, all that's going to upregulate and sort of increase the biological activity.
Also, I was wondering, I've heard that people don't understand that the largest organism in the world is mycelium. Is that true? Because of the kind of like neural network situation going on of whatever that creature is?
Yeah, I should have put some stats in my presentation about that. I haven't thought about that for a while, but yeah, you're talking about what people often call the humongous fungus, and I think there's a couple different mycelial networks like that around the world that are just gigantic. But the one that I've heard the most about is in Oregon, and it's something crazy like 1,000 acres large. Essentially, they went to one corner of this plot of land, took a soil sample, DNA sequenced it, they said, okay, it's this mushroom, right, this mycelium. They went 1,000 acres away to the other side of this plot of land, took a soil core, did the same thing, exact same DNA, meaning that's an identical organism, meaning that it's connected to itself over 1,000 acres. So essentially just 1,000 acres square. I could be wrong on that figure, we can look it up and stuff like that and fact check, but it's massive. It is like a significant part of a state. It's just like one fungus underneath all these different trees, and that fungus is helping the forest grow, and they can even select for which seedlings grow. If there's an aspen versus a pine versus an oak, the fungus is going to say, oh, I actually really like oak trees as my partners, and it will not feed the aspen, and it will feed the oak only.
It's just wild. The largest organism on the planet's not a whale, it's not a tree, it's a fungus, and who knows how intelligent or evolved or where that comes from, but it's crazy, right?
Yeah, that is wild stuff for sure. So how are we doing on time?
Take your time.
Okay, cool. So we'll just keep rolling here. So I'll take this chance to talk to them about medicinal mushrooms, and I think I just have one or two more sections before I'll do a final question for any lingering questions or any thoughts that you guys have. I'm happy to discuss, and then we'll transition to the workshop after that. So just a few more kind of lecture slides here. But medicinal mushrooms are incredible. I highly support the use of medicinal mushrooms as a part of your daily kind of supplements. If you're already taking things like multivitamins, even if you're not, medicinal mushrooms just have a lot of potency and the ability to help different areas of your body, or even just your overall kind of like connectivity, overall body health. So I just want to talk about a few common ones, and I have a bunch of photos. you guys already asked me a bunch of questions about Cordyceps, and I think that hopefully you've gotten to learn throughout me answering them some about it, but I'll just go through my kind of, info here. So once again, Cordyceps, it's the zombie ant fungus. It grows in nature. If you go to the rainforest, for example, Amazon rainforest, any place like that, you will actually see living insects, like an ant, for example, walking around with these mushrooms growing out of their body. So it's kind of a crazy case where the mushroom is parasitizing the insect, but it hasn't killed it yet. So you'll just see like colonies of ants, and they all have these little orange, sticks out of their heads, and it just looks like it's out of a sci-fi film. It's so crazy. So that is common in nature. But these mushrooms can also be grown. We cultivate them indoors, and they can be used as a nutritional supplement. So they boost your energy. They essentially increase and upregulate your body's normal ATP production. So essentially just more available energy. They can improve your lung capacity, like someone mentioned. They can increase your heart rate in some cases, which may be desirable, maybe not. You might sort of overdose on cordyceps, which you're not going to die or anything. You just might get flushed for like an hour. So, just something to be aware of, like kind of, always start with a low dosage and increase as you see fit. So as I was mentioning, yeah, it's a great supplement for exercise. I like to take it like an hour or two before I go to the gym or go for a run or something like that, just to kind of keep me alert and keep me sort of energized. And then as I was mentioning as well, yeah, it is difficult to cultivate indoors, so not a great candidate for a beginning grower or someone who's new to growing mushrooms, but it's totally something you can cultivate, and there are guides online and books. I would just say, don't just kind of jump in head first and try and go cordyceps. I might start with an oyster mushroom first and kind of work your way up to that. But overall, cordyceps is great, and I might just take this opportunity, because I don't have any slide info on it, but I do want to address the question of kind of like, what's the best form to take these mushrooms in? So people are mentioning tinctures, there are powders, there are like coffee with mushroom powder in it. Like there's so many forms out there, and like gummies and things like that. So in general, I would say that tinctures are probably one of the best things you can get. Obviously, you can do an alcohol extraction, you can do a hot water extraction, you can also make your own tincture. I'm not an expert in that by any means, but I just am familiar with these kind of techniques. And so, so tinctures are awesome, powders are great as well, and I'll talk about it on a later slide though, but you just really want to make sure if you're buying any product that's like a medicinal mushroom product, you want to do a fact check on the label to make sure that it says fruiting body. So I might just jump ahead. So yeah, so we'll come back to the kind of specific mushrooms, but let's just talk about mycelium versus fruiting body really quick. So if you guys have been paying attention, hopefully you can now distinguish what's the difference between a mycelium and a fruiting body. Obviously that's mycelium, that's a fruiting body. So mycelium is great, it's how mushrooms grow, but it is not where the medicinal potency is found. So medicinal potency is found by and large in the fruiting body. So what I've done is put a couple example supplement labels here. These are not mine, I did not make these, these are on the market. So if you look down here, the ingredient is Cordyceps mycelium as well as reishi mycelium. So what we're not seeing here is fruit body, right? Let's take another example. Over here on this left side, we have organic lion's mane, mycelial biomass, and fruit body. So that has both. That's a little better, right? Still not great. If we look on this side, this particular brand, Gaia Herbs, I'm not that familiar, but I just pulled this label. They have a lion's mane supplement, and the ingredient is lion's mane fruiting body extracts. That's A+, because it is only fruiting body. So to kind of talk a little bit more in detail about this, mycelium is generally good. You can eat it. It's fine. It's not like tasty or anything. You could take a powder, like a pill of it, and you'll be fine. But once again, the medicinal potency and the actual compounds that are benefiting your body are really found and concentrated in the mushrooms. So in the case of Ganoderma mushroom, which is the reishi, ganoderic acid is one of the most potent compounds, and it's well studied. You can look up academic articles that will essentially tell you what ganoderic acid is doing to the human body. But that is mainly found in the mushroom, and it's not really in the mycelium at all. So essentially, long story short, if you're buying any products and you're not making it yourself, I also support making these types of supplements yourself, but this is a little bit more kind of high level and not as accessible. But yeah, so just be on the lookout for the product label. Never buy something that is like this, that's a mix of both, or like this, which is only mycelium. You really want fruiting bodies only, because if it says this, you don't know how much is mycelium and how much is fruiting body. That could be 99% mycelium, and they don't have to tell you. So, yes.
Yeah, I just want to share I just wanted to add a couple things onto what you're saying. So in addition to always wanting the fruiting body, also extracts are super important. A lot of mushrooms, most mushrooms, maybe all of them, we don't actually have the ability to digest and like get out the nutritious like stuff that we actually that's in them, the benefits, the medicinal benefits of them. So extracts are super important, and then specifically for reishi, chaga, and turkey tail, anything that's like really shiny, that has that like shiny stuff on it, double extract, like a water extraction and an alcohol extraction is really important to get too. You know, it's not entirely necessary, but with there's some things that are going to be only extracted by water and some things only extracted by alcohol. So you know, for like that double extraction. And then the last thing is like, so with the mycelium, a lot like when they actually put that stuff in the capsules, you're getting a lot of the like the what is it? The
grain or
yeah, like what
oats
it's
or
grown
something.
on.
Yeah.
So like if you actually, one way to like test kind of like the medicinal quality of things is like if you open the capsule and actually taste it. Like that product, I've tasted it and you open it and it tastes like graham crackers. And like the medicinal benefit, the medicinal like flavor is gonna be really bitter. Like the beta glucans are super bitter, and like so that's one way you can kind of like see what's going on with that.
Yeah, thanks so much for that point. Those are all super good points. I 100% agree. And I'll even add one more thing on there, not to like complexify this too hard, but there are some cases in which the mycelium of a given mushroom does have more beneficial compounds than the fruiting body, but that is very rare and it's poorly studied and understood. So while that might be the case, and if you find like an academic article that tells you, oh, for shiitake, the mycelium is actually better for you than the fruiting body for XYZ reason, take that idea and run with it. But just in general, as kind of like, you know, as a broad scopes thing, just definitely be prioritizing the fruiting bodies, prioritizing extracts, and then being on the lookout, as you mentioned, for this thing right here. Yeah, so you see other ingredients, myceliated oats, that is of no value to us. That is like the spent substrate. So that's equivalent to like when you brew beer, spent grains, very little nutrition is left in that. You can still eat it, but like it's not a primary food source. So definitely be on the lookout for fillers is essentially what that is. I have some companies that I would recommend. I think just OM mushroom supplements is really good. And then Four Sigmatic as well is another company that I'm familiar with. I'm not.
What is it?
Four Sigmatic.
Can you tell us about the way that they infuse like lion's mane extract into coffee?
Yes. So I'll also bookend that by saying I'm not an expert and I'm probably not going to have like a great perfect answer for you on specifically on medicinal mushrooms. I do study fungi in general, but I think in a lot of cases for the sort of coffee stuff, they're either going to put a powder directly into the ground coffee, so you're essentially going to get a product that's like ground coffee and ground fruiting body like dried in that, or they'll get an extract and literally just like dose it in. So some kind of an alcohol or water tincture, they dose it in and then maybe dry it out one more time so it's not wet in the package, and then it's just kind of in the ground coffee. So some way of just adding it directly into those coffee grounds, but I'm not 100% on that. Totally. So I'll walk it back and talk just a little bit more about the benefits of some specific mushrooms. So I just have a few more to talk about. We went through Cordyceps. So turkey tail is another one that we've kind of mentioned a couple times here. So that species is going to be Tremetes versicolor. Turkey tail is one of my favorite mushrooms for a number of reasons. It's really pretty. So this is a picture of a turkey tail here, or at least something in the Tremetes family. So turkey tail, the effects on the human body is that it'll boost your immune system function. It's essentially, once again, upregulating the immune function that's already happening, so it's not drastically changing what's going on. It's just kind of upregulating your own body function. Overall, it's just going to boost your health, might boost your mood. It's just kind of boosting your resilience and your sort of resilience to colds and external viruses and things. And then additionally, a great thing about the turkey tail is that it is extremely common throughout the US and world, and it can also be ID'd relatively easily. So you can go to North Carolina, find turkey tail, California, find turkey tail, Colorado, go to the woods, you'll find some turkey tail if you're looking hard enough and in the right place. So it's a really great mushroom to learn how to identify it and make your own tinctures and extracts and things like that. Once again, I cannot say it enough times, but never eat a mushroom that you're not 100% ID, certain of the ID. That includes making a tincture and eating that, or making an alcohol extract, drinking that. But at the same time, you can find guides online for how to ID these mushrooms. Once you feel confident about it, maybe send a picture to an expert or consult like online forums and things like that. But once you're confident of that ID, you can go to the moon and back and make your own tinctures and things, and it's going to be the best. So another thing I'll say at this juncture is that if you have the option of getting a wild harvested mushroom versus an indoor cultivated mushroom, I personally am going to take the wild harvested mushroom 9 times out of 10. if you think about like in the old growth forest, you have a reishi mushroom, for example, growing off a tree. That reishi is probably going to have more potent medicinals than something that I grew in my basement. That's because of the diverse microbes in nature. And of course, we can replicate those systems, or it's sort of like indoor farming versus outdoor. Like I can still eat my indoor kale, but it might not be as good as the outdoor. There's a lot there, but just in general, if you're getting a wild harvested mushroom from a reputable vendor, it's probably better for you than an indoor cultivated one. However, they're both still good. So, and to wrap up the medicinal section, I just have 2 more mushrooms to talk about. So we have lion's mane and reishi as well. So lion's mane right here, super cool. Reishi right here. And I'm probably blocking the photo, so I'll go on this side. But lion's mane species is going to be Hermesium erinaceum. So lion's mane is often called like the brain mushroom. So it supports brain function. There are academic articles that support this. It's theorized to improve neurogenesis, and what that means is that it can help your body produce new neurons, which it doesn't normally do that. But that's like kind of like a theory, right? So not fully confirmed, or at least healing of your existent neural network. So kind of some really interesting effects on the brain that we're still studying and understanding today. Additionally, it'll support motor function, promote your nerve health and growth as well, so kind of just helping those normal functions of the body. And then finally, you can find this in the wild, and then supplements are also very common. So you can find this in the grocery store, Safeway, King Soopers, but just remember all those things we talked about kind of sourcing and choosing your mushroom supplements. And then finally, last mushroom to talk about. This mushroom is close to my heart because I slaved away with this mushroom for like 2.5 years at my last company, but it's great. Ganoderma lucidum or resinaceum. These are the so genus name Ganoderma, and then species can be lucidum, resinaceum, or lingji. These are all the reishi mushroom, and it's kind of a bit of an umbrella in the way that you can call a lot of different things by the same name. These are a lot of species that are technically reishi. The reishi is called the 10,000-year mushroom in traditional Chinese medicine because in the lore, if you eat this mushroom, you will live for 10,000 years. So while that might not necessarily be true, the origin and the background for this is that it's just so good for you that it will extend your lifespan. It supports your immune system, respiratory health. It can be a sleep aid, it can calm you down, reduce stress, and it can overall increase your energy level. Different varietals of it that I've mentioned a few of them here can have different effects on you, so I advise you to experiment and try different ones. And once again, there's red reishi, black reishi, all these different kind of types that you can explore and buy tinctures and things like that. And then finally, I mentioned already, but it's got ganoderic acid, which is like a well-known compound, and the effects of it on the body are well-known and studied. So you can look up literature and papers about ganoderic acid and learn more about, on the kind of like cell level, what's going on when you take that mushroom. And then yeah, also the context for me slaving away with reishi is that the last company I worked at, MycoWorks, makes mushroom leather out of the reishi mushroom. So we would grow that all day long and produce leather that now is being made into handbags, watch straps, car upholstery, yoga mats, really just everything. Yeah, so we'll talk more about that in the next section. So my last 2 sections are going to be bioremediation, and then I think just like biomaterials, and then that's all I got. So any more questions on medicinal mushrooms or anything I can help explain?
Keep rolling. Oh, there's one. Oh, sorry, there's 2. There can be 2.
I'll also stop for questions at the end too. Maybe I'll blow, after these questions, I'll just blow through the last 2 sections.
Yeah, I'm just curious, your favorite mushroom and like what your regime looks like with these medicinal mushrooms.
Totally. Okay, those are both great questions. Favorite to eat or just like favorite?
I'm just
period?
gonna say favorite mushroom.
Okay, yeah, so I have like some mushroom tattoos, and so this one right here on the bottom of my wrist is called the Caprinus mushroom that we saw on the video. They're called the ink cap mushrooms, and so as they sort of are dying, they like do that kind of melty thing, which is just so crazy to see. And you can see that in nature too. When they get old, you just see these black slimy spore guys hanging out. So I just think they're so cool, and there's not much else in nature that does that. So for me, like at least visually, aesthetically, that's gonna be my favorite. And then for my medicinal mushrooms, I got some really great tinctures. Someone mentioned Telluride, a mushroom festival. I went there last year. Highly recommend if anyone wants to learn more about fungi or have an event that's here in Colorado that you can really broaden your horizons with things like foraging. They lead forays into the woods and teach you how to harvest these wild mushrooms. But yeah, tinctures, I love tinctures. I have a Cordyceps tincture that I use whenever I feel like it, sometimes 2-3 times a day. I have a reishi tincture that I use a lot. And then I'll also make my own. So I've made my own like turkey tail powder. I've made my own lion's mane capsules. So I kind of like to get like a bulk supplement in a powder form and then do my own stuff with it. I'll just like make capsules and things like that, just so that I'm like really confident, or also from stuff that I grow too. But in general, I'll just like take tinctures throughout the day, take supplements, maybe pill form like once or twice a day.
Just kind of intuitively as you feel like it, not so much like a specific, I do this every day thing.
Yeah, I think I probably could be better. I think that's more just a reflection of like my personality. Is just kind of like, I just do it whenever I feel like it. But I think a good way to do it would be like 1 to 2 times daily, like beginning, end of the day, depending on the mushroom. Cordyceps wouldn't take it after midday, but reishi you can take it anytime. Turkey tail you can take it anytime. It's not really going to affect your sleep too much, or at all. But yeah, Cordyceps or any other sort of like energy boosting mushrooms, definitely try and take them early in the day so that you don't kind of stay up too late.
Thank you.
All right, so you just kind of mentioned that, but I was wondering, we were discussing coffee and how it kind of messes with our stomachs. Do you have any recommendations for specifically like energy boosting mushrooms, maybe in addition to Cordyceps? It sounds like that's one of them though.
Yeah, I think Cordyceps is the primary one that I can think of on the top of my head. I know that there are other mushrooms that can have similar effects to that, but I'm having trouble thinking of them off the top of my head. I know that chaga is another really common one, but I'm not thinking about all the like actual effects of that. Chaga could be one to explore. Even shiitake, like a shiitake extract, might also have an energy boosting functionality.
Awesome.
I'm just not that personally experienced with it. I mostly use shiitake like culinarily as opposed to medicinally. Sorry, but a lot of these normal mushrooms, like even chanterelles and things like that, you can make a tincture, and so it could be the case that a common edible mushroom might have that effect if you were to make a tincture out of it.
Very cool.
So as long as it's edible, it can be medicinal too.
Cool. Thank you.
For sure. All right, y'all. So I'm gonna go through these last 2 sections so we can get on to the workshop, which I think is gonna be a ton of fun, and I'm excited to show you guys how to grow your own mushrooms.
Yeah.
So let's talk about bioremediation real fast, even though I have a lot to say. Bioremediation with fungi, in general, is the idea that we can clean up a toxic landscape or toxic compounds using the power of fungi. So to set the scene, we know that in the world, all of us are pretty aware, toxins from many industries pollute the landscape. We have mining, oil, intensive chemical agriculture and husbandry, as well as runoff from industrial factories. So these are all things that we don't want in the environment, right? They're generally not bioavailable. They're generally harming the ecosystem rather than helping it. So what we can do about that is utilize the power of biology. So plants, microbes, and fungi all have the ability to absorb these toxins into their own bodies and degrade them into bioavailable forms. So what that means, bioavailable, that means that it can be uptaken by other organisms. So if you have something like oil in the environment, it's not bioavailable. Like nothing can really eat that. A duck cannot eat that. Algae cannot eat that. Maybe some plants can eat that, but not easily. Mycelium and Mycelium. Mycorrhizae is in reference to, I think they're almost synonyms. So mycorrhizae would be like, I'm looking at a plot of ground and I have like a handful of fungi. I would say like, here's like a mycorrhizal network. And then mycelium is just how you would refer to any aggregate of hyphae. And then hyphae is like one little string of that whole network.
Basically the same, but
Yeah, just slight differences there. Test. Okay, cool. All right, so let's keep talking about bioremediation. So so bioavailable, once again, it means that it can be uptaken by other organisms. So how do we take these toxins and make it so that other forms of life can actually use them, right? Because it's not that oil is inherently toxic, it's just in a form that's not super accessible, like it might be recalcitrant, or the molecular structure might be such that it's not easy to access. So we can use a combination of all types of life. So plants, fungi, and microbes like bacteria. There's terms for all of these. Using plants to bioremediate is phytoremediation. Using fungi is mycoremediation. And using microbes, you would just say it's microbial remediation, like bacteria. So using all these different types of organisms in concert, we can do things like break down oil, heavy metals, etc. So here's some examples of pollutants that can be broken down by fungi, but also some of these other organisms. Heavy metals, chlorofluorocarbons, or which are abbreviated as CFCs, just like a really recalcitrant sort of like byproduct of certain industries. And then finally, crude and refined oil. So I just have some pictures to show here. This is like an oyster mushroom culture that they're adding oil to, and you can see that these mushrooms are fruiting after weeks. And so essentially they're taking that oil and using it as a food source and breaking it down. And then also mycelium can be used as water filtration as well. So here's like another oyster mushroom log that is in like a hemp sac, so all biodegradable materials. And these mushrooms are fruiting after being put into a contaminated waterway. So these mushrooms are not only filtering the water, but they're also still producing an edible food, which you might not want to eat these because there might be toxins in those mushrooms. But if you took these mushrooms, put them into the forest, waited a couple generations, came back in a year or two, those mushrooms would probably be free of any toxins. So it's the kind of thing where we can utilize mycelium and other microbes to address some of these kind of unfortunate byproducts of industry and of rapid urbanification. So just to kind of say a few more points on this topic, mushrooms and fungi have been shown to be able to break down plastics as well. So obviously plastics, microplastics, big concern in the ocean, in terrestrial environments as well. I have a photo here. It's not really clear to see, but there's essentially plastic being put into each one of these little cones, and it's inoculated with an oyster mushroom or a certain species, which I'm forgetting the name, but a certain type of oyster mushroom can break down that plastic once again into a bioavailable form. So kind of super exciting to think about that in terms of like, yeah, we're cleaning up the ocean, cleaning up microplastics and things like that. So just to kind of summarize, we can break down plastics, we can break down and remediate toxic land. Mushrooms can even absorb radiation into their own bodies. The first living organism growing in Chernobyl after the radiation disaster is a fungi that's absorbing the radiation and using it to grow, which is nuts. And then finally, yeah, pollutants and runoff. And then finally, I just want to wrap up and say, these are all kind of like more or less known functions of fungi for bioremediation, but there's so many more unknown functions because we know about 100,000 species of fungi on Earth, but there's projected to be anywhere from 2 to 10 million species. So there are literally millions of fungi that we don't even know what they do or what they're called or what they look like, but they're doing crazy stuff in nature, and they might be able to break down even more pollutants and other sort of recalcitrant toxins in the environment. So really exciting stuff. I could go on for days about that. I'm not, once again, not an expert on that in particular, but I'm passionate about it, so it's great. So I'm going to run through fungal biomaterials really fast to get to the workshop. So fungal biomaterials, in a similar vein to bioremediation, are just kind of like a cutting edge technology that we're beginning to learn more and more about. So I put a bunch of company icons right here. Not the most interesting slide, but I just want to tell you about some of these companies that are doing really amazing things. Yes, so Cultivated Design is making mycelium styrofoam. They are able to make a styrofoam that's fully biodegradable. They essentially just use sawdust to grow mycelium, and that mycelium can just replace styrofoam. It's one-to-one. You don't need to do anything. You can take that mycelium styrofoam, throw it in your garden, it breaks down, done deal. So great. Nature's Fine makes fungi-based meat. It's okay. They're a competitor of my company, so I can't speak that highly of them, but they're in stores. At Last Food is a spin-off of Ecovative. They make mycelium bacon, so that's awesome. Mycorrhiza, also fungi-based meat. MycoWorks, I mentioned them earlier, they're making leather out of reishi, so definitely cool to keep an eye out, and you can actually, well, I don't know if you can buy their products right now, but pretty soon you should be able to buy products made with that. Bolt Threads is also doing mycelium materials like leather type thing. Corin has been around for a long time. They're based out of the UK, and they just make like mycelium chicken patties, chicken nuggets, but it's 100% vegan and just mycelium. And then finally, Meaty Foods. Meaty Foods, yeah. So that's where I work. So I used to work at MycoWorks for the better part of 3 years in California. I'm now working at Meaty for almost 1 year now. Meaty makes whole food cuts out of mycelium. So we make like a full chicken breast that's like yay thick, or like a full steak that's like yay thick. So as far as if you're vegan or vegetarian or just looking to reduce your meat consumption, highly recommend checking out Meaty. We're in restaurants in the area. You can also get our stuff online every month. We do like a drop, and if you log on that day, you can buy it and we'll ship it to your house. So we do chicken, steak, we're working on jerky, and we're also working on like salami and like ground meat as well. So yeah, we can do everything with this fungi, and it's so incredible, and it tastes so good, and it's just like fungi, flavoring, and like salt. Like that's all we add. So it's like one of the most nutritive foods you can get. It's healthier for you than meat, easier to digest, so it's great. Highly recommend. So I have some stuff here. Just to summarize, we can make styrofoam out of fungi, leather, meat, building blocks for actual buildings that I have some pictures here, insulation for your house, soundproof paneling for your house, as well as like biodomes. You can literally grow a structure if you have the scaffolding using mycelium. So these are all real solutions that are closer to implementation, closer to reality than you might think. So here's like a literal building made out of mycelium blocks. Here's just a structure. Here's some examples of MycoWorks leather, and this is the handbag that I helped them create using this mycelium leather. And just some more cool photos. You can make structures and statues using molds. These are pictures of Meaty's products, so fungus steak and fungus chicken, fungus bacon, more structures, and then these are like Mogu mycelium acoustic panels that are just like acoustic dampening panels. So yeah, the future is fungi. I want to emphasize that. So that is the official end of my talk. So thanks for listening. That was a lot. So we covered a lot of ground. I'm super happy to take questions, and then we can also just get set up for the workshop right after that.
I feel like most of these presentations deserve a standing ovation. This is definitely one of them, but just saying. I'm doing it, but anyways. Any questions? We all feel it. It's hot in here, I know. Any questions? Question from outside. The mushrooms have spread.
Yeah, for real.
We actually are going to.
Lion's mane is generally accessible. Where do you find reishi?
Do you mean as a fruiting body or like in the store? Like in nature?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So in nature, reishi is a shelf fungus. So I don't know if I have any pictures of it properly growing. Oh, here. So yeah, reishi is what's called a shelf polypore, which means that it grows out of the trunk of an established tree. So if you just see, this is like a literal tree that's kind of off screen here, and this is the reishi growing directly out of it. So it's going to be growing on mature hardwoods. So you can look for things like oak stands, in some cases pine, but it's less common, some cases fir, mostly just hardwoods. You're going to find this reishi growing in a humid environment off of a hardwood. So I would generally be looking at mature forests, like the oldest forest around that you can easily get to is a good place to find. You can also find it on fallen logs too. So just fallen log on the ground, you don't need to flip it over or anything. It'll just be growing straight out the side of it. And there's guides online to help you identify what type of mushroom you might find there. Lion's mane, it'll also be growing out of trees, kind of in a similar fashion. But I don't know, it might be hardwoods or softwoods. You could definitely Google that though. And then in the store, both of these are super common. So as I was saying earlier, like literally King Soopers, Safeway, Sprouts, and Whole Foods will all have mushroom supplements with both of these. But the trick is just to find the right ones, and also online as well. So you could just Google up mushroom supplements. The companies that I was endorsing earlier are Four Sigmatic and Om Mushrooms, just OM Mushrooms. Those are both companies that I feel pretty good about. I don't know if they're like 100% perfect, but they're pretty good. Yeah.
I think it's funny how people are like, robots are about to take over the world. We're going to start 3D printing earthen houses. And then mushrooms are like, we are everything.
Yeah, like they were doing it first, and they're still doing it, and we didn't even know about it, but now we're kind of getting wise to what's going on with fungi. So yeah, it's totally future tech, but it's also like ancient primordial tech as well, because they've evolved alongside humans, alongside plants, and they're just all over the place. So.
Mushroom babies.
Woo! Thank you, Nick.
Let's make mushroom babies. So I think what's best is if we go outside. We can go outside, and it's going to take me less than 5 minutes to set up. It'll be really straightforward, and we can just get our hands on, and everyone can get at least one. People can probably make multiple because I have a lot of materials, and you guys can all have your own mushroom culture. So just come outside when you're ready, and we'll get it all set up. We have our nutritive substrates. So we have just cardboard that I soaked in water for just a few hours before this presentation. I talked a lot about how humidity is important, so this is where a lot of our humidity is going to come in. This cardboard is just saturated with water. There is a technique you can use, which is called overnight pasteurization, where any substrate you have, it can be grain, it can be straw, it can be sawdust. If you soak it underwater and fully submerge it, where like the whole thing is covered, you're creating an anaerobic environment, right? Because it's underwater, there's no air in there, so nothing can breathe. So anything that's an aerobe, meaning an organism that breathes air, can live. So if you do that for 24 hours, you kill all the aerobes. All you have are anaerobes, and that's technically pasteurized, which means you've killed a lot of the bad bacteria, but you've left some of the good ones. So that's as opposed to sterilizing, where you just kill everything. So sterilizing is what I did for this, to be able to get it to be a pure culture. the second I sliced open the top, which I just did like 1 minute ago, it's no longer sterile, but it is still a pure culture as far as like, that's just mushroom in there, like, right? So if anyone wants to like take a whiff right now and just smell what this smells like, it's like very alive. It's like a very strong kind of earthy mushroom smell. And this is a brown beech mushroom. So I had a slide, but I just skipped it, but I'll just tell you verbally. So brown beech is a really tasty edible mushroom. It's used a lot in like Chinese and Japanese cooking. And it grows these mushrooms that have these like nice little caps, and they're really good to saute in a pan or put in soup. So yeah, it's a super strong smell.
Love it.
But that's how you can tell that it's alive.
Very organic.
Very mushroomy.
And it's grown on, I believe this is popcorn grains. So you guys will get your hands on this too. So I just want to give you a little bit of a sensory kind of introduction as we go here.
That's what we like.
Taster.
Yeah.
Did you say popcorn greens?
Yeah, I believe it's popcorn. Let me get in there and make sure. Yeah, so I can get a handful of this. So essentially just raw popcorn kernels that my friend and I hydrated and then sterilized. So let me get a full handful here. So this is living mushroom spawn. And so you can see that all these little grains are breaking apart as I touch them, but they are holding together if I'm not disrupting them. So the mycelium is the white stuff that's covering the grains. And obviously the grains are still there. They haven't like been totally broken down. But this is what is called inoculum. So that means this whole process is called inoculation. And to put that simply in simple terms, that just means that we're taking a living thing and we're transferring it from one vessel to another. So this is what I would call fully colonized substrate. It's fully colonized with our mushroom. And we have uncolonized substrate. So once again, we got this cardboard that we pasteurized, and we also have this coffee grounds. So coffee grounds, I just got this from my local coffee shop. Obviously nothing special, it's just coffee grounds. I sterilized it in an autoclave. So that's essentially just a high-tech pressure cooker. When you sterilize things, like I said, you're killing everything in there. So once again, I just popped the tops off of these, which means they're no longer sterile. But I can show you my lids and tell you a bit about my techniques that I use when I grow mushrooms. So this is called a Micron Filter. This is literally just a disc that you can buy on Amazon for like 10 bucks for 10. And it's really straightforward. It's just like a cloth filter that is woven so finely that the size of any given pore or hole is 0.2 microns, meaning you can't even see it. And water probably won't go through this unless you really force it to. So essentially what this does is this creates a filter that air can go through, but nothing else. So no particulate, no dirt, no fungi, and no microbes. Nothing that's alive can make it through these little holes. So it's like a breathable port that keeps it clean. So this is something that anyone can use. If you get this right size, it's called mason jar, mouth or whatever. It fits right inside the jar of this wide mouth mason jar lid. And so this is like a super low cost way to grow mushrooms, is using these mason jars, these lids you can get that are like, $1 a pop. And these are also reusable. So until this disintegrates, you can keep reusing this and re-sterilizing it every time. So overall, just trying to drive the point home that mushroom growing doesn't have to be high tech, doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be, like sort of like a high level. So we can really do it in a basic fashion. What I want to stress today, we're all going to make our mushroom cultures. I'm going to demo it for you guys here in 1 second. These mushroom cultures might not turn out perfectly. So we're doing it open air, which means we're not sterile, right? So that's the limitation. If we were in a lab or something, or if I was at my work in my lab, or if it was at my home lab or something, I could show this to you guys and make it perfectly sterile, but we're outdoors, we're at Sanctorum. Sanctorum does not yet have a sterile lab space, although I'm hoping to help them create one. So for the time being, it's not gonna be perfect, but also we have so many materials that you guys can make multiple if you want. So it's kind of all up to you guys about how many do you wanna make and what exactly do you wanna do. The limitation might be Ziplocs, honestly, so maybe let's start, everyone can do one, and then whatever extra materials are left, you guys can just go for it. So I'll go ahead and demo it right now, and you guys can ask me questions as I go. But what we're gonna do, you're gonna take a piece of cardboard. All the cardboard is fine. Some of it is more thick than others. You're gonna take a piece that can be rolled up and fit into a Ziploc. So Ziploc is yay big. So ideally just less wide than this width. So I'm gonna take one piece of cardboard, I'm gonna rip it. So I've got this cardboard. I'm gonna wring it out a little bit. We want this to be wet, but not too wet. So, dripping is like a little bit much. So I'm just gonna wring it out to where it's still moist, but not like dripping. So I've got my cardboard here, and we're just gonna make a burrito. So what we're gonna do, mushroom burrito, take the cardboard, we're gonna take these coffee grounds, and I'll ask that we use spoons for these steps to minimize cross-contamination. So you could use your hands, but your hands obviously have your skin bacteria and stuff on them. it's not sterile, but we're trying to give it the best chance essentially, right? So we're just gonna take a spoon, coffee grounds in the middle, just like this, and I have more than these jars too if we run out. This maybe isn't coffee grounds straight down the middle. Once you have these coffee grounds, we're already almost done. So essentially, the mushroom can eat the cardboard, it can also eat the coffee grounds. Coffee grounds have a little bit more nutrition, and then the cardboard is providing a lot of the moisture and just like the structure and the scaffolding for the mycelium to grow on. Then you're gonna take a spoonful of the grains. So you don't need a ton. I'm just taking 1 spoon right now. I'm gonna assess how we're doing. That's pretty good. I'm gonna take a little bit more, just like 1.5 to 2 spoons. That's all you need. So we now have our living mushroom culture. We have our coffee grounds, and we're just gonna make a burrito. So just roll it up like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can do this any which way you want. So long as you make it to where you have a matrix, right? So we have the sort of a, yeah, we have a matrix for the fungus to grow. Then you're just gonna take your Ziploc, slap it inside. You can fold it, you can do whatever. Here, ideally making it, keep its shape at least somewhat. Seal it up. You don't want to fully evacuate the air in here. I would evacuate it a little bit, leave some air because it does need to respire when it's in there. The most critical thing is closing it fully. So I probably got a little too much cardboard on this one, but it's not a super big deal. So we close it fully. We make sure that it's here more or less. If stuff spills out, it's fine. This is now a mushroom culture that will grow. And so what you can also do, because all these are going to look kind of the same, I have some Sharpies. You can write your name on it. You can write what you want to name this culture on it. You can write whatever you want. You can draw a picture, some kind of identifying factor so that you can keep track of yours as opposed to other people's. But once you have it sealed up like this, that's it. This is a living mushroom culture. It will grow in here. If it's growing and it stalls, or if it's growing and you want to do something with it, you can pop it open to give it a little air exchange. I wouldn't do that too often, every 3 to 4 days maybe, but I would wait at least a week. Leave it closed, let it do its thing, let it grow. Pop it open for air every once in a while. Once it's fully grown and you're seeing white coming out of the ends, that's probably a good time to transfer it. So this would be a time when you could go to another jar, you could go to an outdoor bed, you could take this mushroom culture, you could take some more cardboard and straw or coffee grounds, put it in your yard, and you can do a sandwich. So you do like a layer of wet cardboard, a layer of straw, a layer of mushroom spawn, and just repeat as many layers as you want, and that will provide you an outdoor mushroom bed that grows edible mushrooms. So that's kind of like my 10-minute tutorial here. I'm just gonna let you guys go for it, and I'll just hang out, and if you guys have questions for me or want to talk more about mushrooms and fungi, I'm all for it. So please go for it. Bags are here, coffee grounds, cardboard, and the mushroom spawn.
I put some hand sanitizer out there as well.
Oh, that is A+, yeah. Should have all the moisture it needs inside of here.
Okay, but
So
when you like,
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about conditions for it. So the conditions for it, you should keep it indoors when possible, and the main thing is you don't want to let it get too hot. If this gets above 90 to 95 Fahrenheit, you risk killing the organism. So tomorrow, for example, during the day, don't leave it in your car because it's gonna way overheat. I would like leave it in the yurt, or if you have a cooler or a fridge set up out here, pop it in the fridge for now. And then once you guys get to your respective homes, it can be cold, yeah. All the cold is gonna do, freeze will probably kill it. Fridge will just slow it down. So fridge is A-okay for fungi. I had this whole bag in the fridge like yesterday, and it was A-okay fine. And then, so essentially once you take it out of the fridge, you just want to let it wake up, and it'll just take a couple days. I'm gonna take this spawn up here. But yeah, fridge is fine, freezer probably overkill, and then hot sun is also overkill.
and then how do you eat it?
Oh, ring it out.
How do you eat it, you said?
Yeah.
You're gonna want to get it to fruit mushrooms. So this by itself could fruit mushrooms, but you likely want to transfer it. So that's what I was saying about making like an outdoor bed, or once again, jars. I can like send out my PowerPoint because I had a couple of slides that I didn't talk through because I just felt like I was taking too long on my talks. But essentially I have in my slides instructions for how to make your own mushroom jars. So you could essentially make this at home, minus the actual living stuff, just with wheat grain, rye grain, wild bird seed, stuff you can get at Walmart.
Just dry.
You want to hydrate it first,
Okay.
then you want to fill the jar, then you want to sterilize it.
Or just put the water in.
I usually do a simmer for 20 minutes, pull it off the heat, strain it, let it air dry, and then put it in here. I have all these instructions too on the paper, on the slides. You want to cook this in a pressure cooker, or you can do it on a stovetop pot, just like a metal pot, rag in the bottom, water. You essentially steam it for like 3 hours, and then under like a Bunsen burner, camp stove, pop the top, take a chunk of this, get it in there, close the top, and then that's how you would inoculate. And then this jar, once it grows, you can just pop that top, keep it wet, and it will grow mushrooms straight out the top.
Cool. And then how do you eat it? Just raw or cook it or what?
Definitely cook it.
Okay.
Saute it with oil or butter.
Cool.
My personal recommendation, if you eat animal products, is butter, soy sauce. Hopefully you've all made mushroom babies, and if you didn't and you still want to, there's a lot of materials outside still. And also, if you made one but you want to make another one, you can also do that too. And then Wyra had a great idea, which is that we can take the remaining materials and make like an outdoor mushroom bed. So we can also do that later on. That probably may or may not be an actual kind of like scheduled event, but before I leave, we can just do that, and that'll be great for everyone who is here and around. But yeah, I just want to conclude with some quick closing notes, and I realized that I didn't give as many instructions as I maybe could have about these, so I'll just give you some care instructions for your mushroom babies, and then we'll kind of close it out, and then we'll move on to whatever's next on the docket. So obviously I told you guys about sort of what we just put into these bags. You now have a bag with nutritive substrate that is pasteurized or sterilized in each case, and then you have also inoculated it with mushroom mycelium. So once again, we used the brown beach mushroom today, which is also called shimeji. You can Google that. You can write it down if you're not going to remember. You can ask me about it. I'll also send my slides, or at least some information on like the WhatsApp. So you guys will have like my info. You'll have some instructions on next steps for this. Everyone was asking me, how do I make this make mushrooms? Great question. It's a little bit hard to answer in like a 5-minute, dialogue, but I'll send instructions online, and you guys can kind of like reference those. But immediate care for these, just so that you all know, and so that you don't kind of make any goofs and like kill it immediately. Essentially, you just don't want it to get above 90 Fahrenheit. So for example, if you leave it in a hot car, like tomorrow during the day, it'll probably die. So definitely don't do that. I was saying leaving it inside the yurt could be good. It is getting warm in here, but it's probably not plus 90 plus. If you have a cooler or a fridge, that's also a great place to put it while it's super hot. During the nighttime, anywhere is fine. So essentially, hot is bad over 90, but the warmer it is, the faster it will grow. So 75, 80, 85, it'll continue to grow at a faster rate. Refrigeration is okay. However, freezing is now too cold. So if you put this in the freezer, it's just going to kill the fungus, and you're just going to have a soppy cardboard. So, avoid that. But then also, as far as other care instructions, if you see that your mushroom is growing and it maybe stalls, or it's been like a week or something, I would definitely recommend leaving these at least 5 or 6 days before you open the lid, open the bag. We've created an environment that has other stuff in there, but we're trying to create the best conditions for our mushroom to win the race. So the race is against other microbes. You might get a Trichoderma mold in there, also known as like a green mold. You might get a bread mold or a cobweb mold, which will appear gray, or in some unfortunate cases, you might even get a black mold. So these are all contaminants that we don't want. So if you do see a contaminant, which is very possible, it might even be likely. So I tried to stress earlier, this is not sterile. This is a total DIY, outdoors, we're in the dirt, we're doing it with our bare hands. That's all great. But the trade-off is that we might get those contaminants that I was talking about. So if you see a green or a blue color, or like an orange or a gray that doesn't look nice and white, that might be a case that you see a contamination. You can send me a picture of it on the WhatsApp once you guys have my info, or you can use your best judgment. But if you see that, like for example, your left half is white and your right half is green, you can sub-sample from this, and that means transfer. So you just open it up, put it on a plate or something, take only the white material, leave the green, try and throw that green away, get it out of there. And take like 1 inch of like sort of median space. So like 1 inch away from the green, that's where you want to start taking your subsample, so that you're not transferring those mold spores into your new one. Because it's very likely if you go too close to that mold, you'll just transfer it into the next, and then it will bloom again and you'll get more green mold. So that's just something to watch out for. I will also send on the WhatsApp instructions for next steps. So I'll send instructions. All my materials are outside now, but you guys saw my jar earlier of grains and stuff with some mycelium. I'll send instructions on how to make that yourself at home with like essentially no needed purchasing other than like maybe one thing from Amazon. So essentially it's really easy to do these next steps and to cultivate your own mushrooms. So I'll send out that information. If you see me later on at this event today or tomorrow or anytime, feel free to ask me more in person and I will tell you the answer. But for now, I think that's more or less all I have to say. Does anyone have any final questions about this or about the talk? Yeah.
I had one question about the medicinal mushrooms. I was once told for of the hardwood mushrooms that you have to boil it for hours in order to, like, if you're making it to eat. Is that true?
Yeah, for the most part, I would agree with that. So if you have, for example, a reishi mushroom that you harvested or that you bought from the store or something like that, I would generally try and cut it into as small pieces as you can. And then if you're gonna do a tea or like a water extract, yeah, you're gonna definitely wanna boil that for anywhere from 3 to 8 to 10 hours. Essentially, the longer you boil it, the more you're gonna extract out of there. And you can always just like add in more water to your pot as it evaporates. And you wanna get it to reduce so that you get like a concentrated kind of extract. So you don't wanna boil it into like 10 gallons, you wanna get it down to like maybe just a couple of pints or quarts. But I would agree that that's a pretty good way to do it. And then the other way to do it would be to do like an alcohol extract. So you could also just cut up that mushroom, put it straight into like some vodka or just like some clear alcohol, and you can make a tincture that way as well. And then of course, we also were talking about a dual extraction earlier, which would be like a combination of those two steps as well. So those are all different ways, but those hardwood mushrooms are some of the hardest to break down because if you've ever felt one, I don't think I have any with me today, they're like as hard as wood. They're so tough once they're dry. And so that's kind of part of the reason why it takes so long to get those nutrients and medicinals out, is that it's just so tough in the first place. It's like as hard as wood. Yeah. 2 in the back, yes.
I was just wondering how do you know when the mushrooms are done and ready to eat?
Like hypothetically, if you have it in a jar, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have it in a jar, I wish I had mine here, but it's fine. You could have your jar, say this is your jar. You could open the top of the jar when it's fully white. And then what I would recommend doing is like a really basic way to do it is take like a 2-liter soda bottle, if you guys know what I'm talking about, or any like a milk jug, cut off like the top of it and flip it upside down. So imagine that you have like a dome over your jar. And you just spray the inside of that with tap water, the inside of that plastic bottle that is. Oh yeah, for sure. If you spray the inside of that plastic bottle, you'll make a little mini humid environment, and that's where you'll get your fruits. So thank you for that. So for this jar, you would, like, once again, if it's fully white, this one's not done. This one's like maybe 30%. So you'd wait to see white on the bottom, top, and all sides of the jar. You would open the top, put that soda bottle on there, spray the inside with water, make sure it always looks wet. And then once the mushrooms come up and actually make caps, and those caps open, that's when you know that it's ready. So we talked about the veil that breaks. You want to look for that veil breaking, and essentially right when that veil breaks is like a good time to pick them and to eat them.
I was just wondering if you know for like the dual extracts, are you taking the same material through the alcohol and the water, or would you split up the material, do one in alcohol, one in water, and then combine?
That might be a question for Akshay. And I think she's going to give a talk later today. So I think she'll either answer that during her talk, or that would be a good time to ask because she probably has a better answer than me. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Alrighty.
Can we give one more round of applause?
Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you have a good success with your mushroom babies, and I look forward to seeing the results. So,
Thank you, Nick. Woo, that was amazing. Is it me, or do we clearly need to create a university here?
Our mission is peace.